Welcome back to Revenge Storm, where karma never forgets. Today's story features a daughter abandoned by her own parents when she lost everything. A mother who coldly declared, "This family has no place for a failure." 10 years of being erased from existence. Then a $200 million fortune that brought them crawling back with lawyers. But hidden in documents she signed at 18 lies a secret her family never wanted her to find. What happens when the invisible daughter finally holds all the cards? Stay until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. My name is Megan Patterson. I'm 35 years old, and 6 months ago, I sold my software company for $200 million. But this story isn't about success. It's about the family that threw me away and the secret I discovered about why they really did it. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I learned the rules of the Patterson household before I learned to ride a bike. There were two of them, and they were never spoken aloud, only understood. Rule 1: my father Richard controlled the money. Every bill, every account, every financial decision flowed through him. Rule 2: my mother Linda controlled the story. Whatever version of events she told became the truth, and no one, not my father, not my brother, certainly not me, ever questioned her. My job in that family was simple: be invisible. Don't ask for things. Don't demand attention. Don't make waves. I learned to shrink myself so small that sometimes I wondered if anyone would notice if I disappeared completely. My brother Kyle was 3 years younger, but he lived in a different universe. He received everything without asking: his college tuition paid in full, a car on his 18th birthday, a down payment for his first apartment when he turned 25. I took out student loans, worked double shifts at a coffee shop, and told myself I was building character. Just once, I asked my mother why things were so different for us. I was 19, filling out financial aid forms while Kyle played video games in the living room of the house our parents had just helped him furnish. Linda barely looked up from her magazine. "Kyle needs more support. You've always been so independent, Megan. That's a compliment." I stopped asking after that. It took me years to understand that independent was just code for not worth investing in. When I was 18, my grandparents passed away within months of each other. I loved them deeply. They were the only people who ever made me feel seen. At the funeral, my father pulled me aside and handed me a folder thick with documents. "Estate paperwork," he said. "Just formalities. Sign where the tabs are." I was grieving, exhausted, trusting. I signed everything without reading a single page. Why would I question my own father? A few weeks later, I asked my mother if my grandparents had left anything behind. Her answer came fast, almost rehearsed. "Barely enough to cover the funeral costs. Don't think about money at a time like this, Megan. It's disrespectful." I believed her. I had no reason not to. I didn't know that my grandparents had left $100,000 to be divided between their grandchildren. I didn't know that 50,000 of it was supposed to be mine. And I didn't know that the documents I'd signed had authorized my father to transfer every penny of it to my brother's account. I wouldn't learn any of this for another 17 years. 7 years after that funeral, my life collapsed. The startup I'd poured everything into went bankrupt. I lost my job, my apartment, my savings. At 25, I drove home with nothing but a suitcase and a desperate hope that my family would catch me when I fell. I've already told you what happened at that door. What I didn't tell you was what I did before I drove away. I wrote my new phone number on a piece of paper and slipped it under the doormat. A small gesture, a reaching hand, a final hope that someone in that house might care enough to call. Within a week, I discovered I'd been blocked on both my parents' phones. My emails bounced back. My messages went unanswered. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until years later, was that my mother found that note the very next morning. She read it, showed it to my father, and said 5 words that would haunt me: "She still doesn't understand." Then she threw it in the trash. I would not learn the truth about that note for nearly a decade. In the meantime, I had to survive. The first year after my family threw me away was the darkest of my life. I slept in my car for 3 months straight, parked in different lots each night to avoid security guards and police. I signed up for a Planet Fitness membership because for $10 a month, I could shower and use the bathroom like a human being. I ate 1 meal a day, usually something cheap from a gas station or a dollar menu. I took freelance web design jobs for $50 each, sometimes less, working on my laptop in public libraries during the day and curling up in my back seat at night. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself things would get better. Some nights I believed it. Most nights I did not. Christmas Eve of that first year, I sat in a Walmart parking lot and watched families through the store windows. Mothers pushing carts full of gifts, fathers carrying children on their shoulders, grandparents moving slowly down the aisles, picking out toys for grandchildren they adored. I watched them for hours, my breath fogging the windshield, my stomach empty, my phone silent. No one called. No one texted. No one in the entire world knew where I was or whether I was alive. That night, I made myself a promise. I would never again need anyone's permission to exist. I would build something so solid that no one could ever take it away from me. I would become someone who did not need a family to catch her when she fell because I would never fall again. By year 3, I had clawed my way to something resembling stability. I rented a tiny room in a house with 4 other people sharing a bathroom and a kitchen that always smelled like someone else's cooking. But it was mine. I had a door I could close. I had a bed that was not my car. I started a one-person company helping small businesses move their operations online. My first real client was a family bakery that had been in business for 40 years, but had no idea how to take orders through a website. I built them a simple system, and within 6 months their revenue had doubled. They paid me $3,000 for that work. It was the most money I had ever made at once. That year, my total revenue was $42,000. Not enough to celebrate, but enough to survive. More importantly, I was no longer alone. I hired my first employee, a young woman named Rachel, who answered my job posting, even though I could barely afford to pay her. She believed in what I was building when no one else did. She worked late nights beside me, ate cheap takeout with me, and never once complained that our office was a corner of my rented room. Rachel would become my business partner, my closest friend, and eventually the sister I never had. Year 5 changed everything. I was attending a small business conference in Columbus when I saw a face I recognized across the crowded lobby. My Aunt Caroline, my mother's sister. I had not spoken to anyone from my family in 5 years. I had assumed they all hated me, that my mother had told them whatever story made her look best. I almost turned away. But Caroline saw me first. Her face went completely white. She crossed the room so fast she nearly knocked over a display table. She grabbed my arms and stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. She said my name like a question, like she could not believe I was real. Then she said the words that made the ground shift beneath my feet. She told me that Linda had been giving the family updates about me for years. She said my mother claimed I emailed her sometimes that I wanted space from the family, that I was doing fine, but preferred to keep my distance. I felt my whole body go cold. I told my aunt the truth. I had been blocked on my parents' phones since the week I left. I had not spoken to a single member of my family in 5 years. I had not sent a single email because everyone I tried to send bounced back. My aunt's eyes filled with tears. She asked me what they had done to me. I did not have an answer. I did not know yet how deep the betrayal went. Year 6 brought the breakthrough I had been working toward. I developed an automated business management system that went far beyond simple websites. It handled inventory scheduling, customer communication, and financial tracking, all in one platform. Small business owners loved it because it saved them time and money. Franchise owners loved it because they could manage multiple locations from a single dashboard. By the end of that year, I had 500 businesses paying monthly subscription fees. Rachel looked at our numbers one evening and said something I will never forget. She said this was not a small business anymore. This was a real company. Our revenue that year hit $1.2 million. I cried in the bathroom after she left. Not because I was sad, but because I finally felt safe. Year 7 brought the discovery that would change everything. Expanding the company required serious investment, and banks wanted comprehensive documentation of my financial history. During the review process, a financial advisor asked me a routine question. He asked if I had ever received any inheritance or trust funds that should be accounted for. I laughed and told him my grandparents left barely enough to cover their funeral. He frowned and said that was strange because he could see a dormant account flagged in my credit history. An account opened in my name when I was 18 closed shortly after with a $50,000 withdrawal. My smile disappeared. I requested the records. The documents arrived within weeks. There it was in black and white. An account in my name opened by my father as custodian. A withdrawal authorization bearing my signature. I stared at that signature and remembered the funeral, remembered my father handing me a folder, remembered him saying it was just estate paperwork. I had been 18 years old, grieving, trusting. I had signed away $50,000 without knowing it existed. The transfer destination was an account belonging to my brother Kyle. My inheritance had paid for his life while I slept in my car. Year 8, I prepared. I hired an attorney who specialized in estate fraud. I obtained my grandparents' will from county records and saw the truth written clearly. $100,000 divided equally between grandchildren. I gathered every document I could find. The transfer records, my student loan papers, proving I had paid my own way through college. Kyle's tuition receipts showing payments that matched the timing of my stolen inheritance. My attorney advised patience. She told me to wait until I was successful enough that no one could claim I was doing this for money. She told me to wait until I could prove I wanted justice, not a payout. Year 9 brought my witness. Mrs. Delgado, the housekeeper who had worked for my parents for 15 years, saw an article about my company and reached out through LinkedIn. We met for coffee, and she told me what she had seen the morning after I was thrown out. She watched my mother find the note I had left under the doormat. She heard my mother read it and tell my father that I still did not understand what I had done wrong. She watched my mother throw that note in the trash. Mrs. Delgado apologized for staying silent so long. She said she had needed her job to survive, but she was retired now. She had nothing left to lose, and she was willing to testify to everything she had witnessed. Year 10, I sat in a glass-walled conference room and signed the papers that made me worth $200 million. Rachel hugged me. The lawyers applauded, but I was not thinking about the money. I was thinking about a phone call I knew would come. My family would find out about this sale. They would come back not for me, but for what I now had. And when they did, I would be ready. For the first time in my life, I held all the cards. But I was in no hurry to play them. After the acquisition closed, I did something I had dreamed about since childhood. I bought a plane ticket to Colorado. I had always wanted to live somewhere with mountains, somewhere far from Ohio, somewhere no one knew the Patterson name or the lies my mother had told about me. I planned to disappear quietly into a new life. I sold my company without fanfare, no press conferences, no interviews, no victory laps, just a brief mention in a regional business journal that most people would never read. I felt relief more than joy. For the first time in 10 years, I was financially untouchable. No one could ever make me sleep in my car again. No one could ever make me feel worthless again. I was finally free. But my family had other plans. 3 weeks after the sale, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost did not answer. Something made me pick up anyway. The voice on the other end was warm, sweet, dripping with affection I had not heard in a decade. It was my mother. She said my name like a prayer, like she had been waiting years for this moment. She told me she had missed me so much. She asked how I was doing, where I was living, whether I was happy. She talked for 5 minutes without once acknowledging that she had thrown me out of her house, blocked my phone number, and lied to our entire family about why I disappeared. There was no apology. There was no explanation. There was just sudden warmth that appeared precisely when $200 million did. I let her talk. I said very little, and I pressed the record button on my phone. Before she finished her first sentence, my mother invited me home for dinner. She called it a chance to reconnect as a family, to put the past behind us, to heal old wounds. I knew exactly what it really was, but I accepted anyway. I needed to see their faces. I needed to watch them pretend that the last 10 years had not happened. I needed to understand what they were planning before I made my own move. The dinner was surreal. My parents acted as if I had simply been away on a long trip. My mother set a place for me at the table like she had been saving it all along. My father barely looked at me. Kyle sat across from me with his wife Jennifer, a woman I had never met. Jennifer kept glancing at me with confusion in her eyes. I could see her wondering why she had never heard about this sister, why no one had mentioned me at the wedding she and Kyle had 3 years ago. I almost felt sorry for her. She had no idea what kind of family she had married into. Halfway through dinner, Kyle made his move. He set down his fork and looked at me with the same entitled expression he had worn his entire life. He told me that the family had been talking. He said that I should share my success with the people who raised me. He reminded me that our parents had sacrificed so much, that family should take care of family, that it was only fair for me to give back what I owed. I listened without interrupting. I watched my mother nod along with everything Kyle said. But I also watched my father. Richard barely spoke the entire meal. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for his water glass. He did not look eager like my mother and brother. He looked terrified. He knew something they did not. He knew what I might have discovered during all those years of silence. He knew the documents existed. And he knew what would happen if I ever found them. After dinner, I excused myself to use the bathroom. On my way back, I paused in the hallway outside the kitchen. I could hear them arguing, their voices sharp and urgent. Kyle was practically shouting. He called our father a coward. He said I owed them, and that they needed to push harder. My mother's voice joined in, smoother, but just as hungry. She told Richard this was their chance, that I had more money than I could ever spend, that I would never miss what they were asking for. Then I heard my father's voice barely above a whisper. He said they did not understand what could happen. He said there were things they did not know. But no one listened to him. No one ever did. My mother and brother overruled him the same way they always had. I smiled to myself in that dark hallway. The cracks in their united front were already showing. 1 week after that dinner, I received a formal letter from an attorney representing the Patterson family. The language was polished and professional, but the message was clear. They were exploring options regarding what they called equitable distribution of family-supported success. They claimed that my parents had invested in my upbringing and therefore deserved a share of my wealth. The letter implied that if I did not negotiate willingly, they would pursue legal action and make the dispute public. They were betting that I would pay any amount to avoid scandal. They were betting that I was still the quiet, invisible daughter who never made waves. They had no idea who I had become. My attorney sent our response within 48 hours. The letter was short and precise. It stated that I had evidence of financial irregularities within the Patterson family that would interest both civil courts and the Internal Revenue Service. It stated that I was willing to discuss these matters privately before pursuing further action. It stated that this invitation would not be extended twice. The Pattersons had no choice but to accept. They thought they were coming to negotiate a settlement. They thought they still had leverage. They had no idea they were walking into a trap I had spent 3 years building. The meeting was set for the following week at a neutral location, a law office downtown where neither family had any connections. I knew my father would not sleep for the days leading up to it. I knew my mother would rehearse her concerned parent speech in the mirror, practicing the right tone of wounded love. I knew Kyle would practice looking confident, telling himself he deserved whatever he could get. None of them knew what was waiting for them in that conference room. None of them knew about the documents in my attorney's briefcase, the grandparents' will, the transfer records, the account statements, the witness testimony from Mrs. Delgado. They thought they were coming to take something from me. They did not understand that by the end of that meeting, everything they had built their lives on, every lie, every stolen dollar, every carefully constructed story would come crashing down around them. The family they thought they controlled was about to learn what happens when the invisible daughter finally decides to be seen. The invisible daughter was about to be seen, and I had chosen every detail of how it would happen. The meeting took place at a neutral law office downtown, far from any territory my family could claim as their own. I arrived an hour early. I arranged the chairs so that my family would sit with their backs to the door, a small psychological advantage that most people never notice but always feel. I positioned the documents in the exact order I wanted them revealed. I placed a glass of water at my seat and made sure there were none on their side of the table. I wanted them uncomfortable. I wanted them off balance. I wanted them to feel even a fraction of the powerlessness I had felt for 10 years. Rachel sat beside me as my witness, my friend, and my reminder that I had built a real family, even after they threw me away. When the Pattersons walked in with their expensive attorney, they found me already seated, calm, waiting. Richard's face was gray, the color of a man who had not slept in days. Linda's smile was too bright, too practiced, the mask she wore when she needed to control a situation. Kyle looked confident, almost smug, like a man ready to collect a check he believed he deserved. They sat down across from me, and I watched them realize that the woman facing them was not the desperate daughter they had kicked out a decade ago. They did not recognize me anymore. Good. Their attorney spoke first, his voice smooth and confident. He said his client sought reasonable acknowledgement of their role in my development and success. He said they were open to discussing fair compensation for the sacrifices they had made raising me. He got about 30 seconds into his rehearsed speech before my attorney cut him off. My attorney said that before we proceeded with any discussion, his client had questions that required answers. He said we would start with a document. Then he placed the first piece of paper on the table. It was my grandparents' will obtained from county records, clearly stating that $100,000 was to be divided equally between their grandchildren. $50,000 for Kyle, $50,000 for me. The room went very quiet. Document by document, my attorney laid out the truth. He placed the account records on the table showing an inheritance account opened in my name when I was 18 with my father Richard listed as custodian. He placed the withdrawal authorization next bearing my signature, the same signature I had given my father at my grandparents' funeral when he told me it was just estate paperwork. He placed the transfer record showing $50,000 moving directly from my account to an account belonging to Kyle Patterson. He placed the timeline showing that Kyle's college tuition, his car, his apartment down payment, all of it had been funded in the months and years following that transfer. The math was undeniable. My inheritance had paid for my brother's life while I worked double shifts and took out student loans and eventually slept in my car because I had nothing. Linda's face went white. For the first time in my life, I saw my mother without her mask. She looked old and frightened and very small. Kyle stared at our father with genuine shock. He asked what this was. He demanded to know what was happening. Richard said nothing. He sat perfectly still, staring at the documents like a man watching his own execution. He had nothing to say because there was nothing he could say. The evidence spoke for itself. Kyle turned to me, his voice cracking. He swore he did not know. He said he had no idea where the money came from. He called me his sister like that word still meant something. He looked at me with desperate eyes, begging me to believe him. My attorney placed one more document on the table. Text messages between Kyle and our father from 2 months ago obtained during the discovery process after they sent their legal threat. Kyle had written asking how they could make sure I did not dig into the old financial stuff. Kyle had written that if they got a settlement from me, he wanted his percentage in writing. Kyle had known something was wrong with the family finances. He had chosen not to ask questions. He had chosen to focus on getting paid. The room went completely silent. Kyle's wife, Jennifer, had been invited to this meeting as a show of family unity proof that the Pattersons were a close and loving clan. Now she sat frozen, staring at her husband like she had never seen him before. Her hand had been resting on his arm when the meeting started. It was not touching him anymore. My attorney explained the legal reality in calm, simple terms. Criminal charges for the original theft were unlikely because the statute of limitations had long expired. But civil fraud operated under different rules. The clock started not when the fraud occurred, but when the victim discovered it. I had discovered the theft 3 years ago. I was well within the window to file a civil case. If I pursued that action, Richard would owe the original $50,000 plus 17 years of accumulated interest plus all legal fees. The total came to approximately $95,000. My attorney paused to let that number sink in. Then he added that civil cases were public record. If I filed, everyone would know. The church where Richard served on the board would know. His professional colleagues would know. The entire community my mother had spent decades impressing would know exactly what kind of people the Pattersons really were. I spoke for the first time since the meeting began. My voice was steady, calm, completely under control. I told them I was going to give them a choice. Option 1 was that I file the civil fraud case. They pay the full amount plus fees. The case becomes public record. Everyone learns what they did. Option 2 was that they sign an agreement today. They pay the $95,000 within 90 days. They never contact me again. They tell Aunt Caroline and the rest of the extended family the truth that they stole my inheritance and kick me out to hide it. If they choose option 2, the matter stays private. I laid out the terms and waited. Richard's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. He said they did not have $95,000 in cash. I told him to refinance the house. I told him to sell something. I told him to figure it out the same way I figured out how to survive sleeping in my car after they threw me away. Linda started crying. Not from remorse, not from guilt, but from the realization that her image was crumbling. The story she had told for 10 years was falling apart. The control she had held over our family narrative was slipping through her fingers. Kyle sat frozen in his chair, unable to look at anyone. Richard stared at the table like a man watching his carefully constructed life collapse into rubble. They signed the agreement, all three of them. Their attorney witnessed it. Rachel witnessed it. I watched each of their signatures appear on the paper and felt nothing but relief. As I gathered my documents to leave, my mother called out to me. She said my name like a plea. She said we were still family. She said we could work through this. I paused at the door. I did not turn around. I told her she was never my family. I told her they were just the people I was unlucky enough to be born to. I told her my real family was the people who showed up when I had nothing. They showed up when I had $200 million. That told me everything I needed to know. I walked out into the afternoon sun. Behind me, I heard my mother sobbing and Kyle arguing with Jennifer. I did not look back. I had spent 10 years looking back. I was finally done. I was finally done looking back. And for the first time in my life, I could look forward. 6 months after that meeting, I stood in the living room of a small house in Colorado watching the mountains through windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. I had dreamed of this view since I was a little girl, since I saw a photograph in a magazine, and promised myself that someday I would live somewhere beautiful, somewhere far from Ohio, somewhere that felt like peace. Rachel flew out to help me unpack. We spent a week together, arranging furniture and hanging pictures and laughing at how many boxes I had accumulated for someone who once owned nothing but a suitcase and a car. On her last night, we sat on the balcony with glasses of wine watching the sun set behind the peaks. Rachel looked at me and said I had done it. She said I had actually done it. I smiled and told her we had done it. Because none of this would have existed without her. She was the first person who believed in me when I had nothing to offer. She was the first member of the family I chose for myself. For the first time in 35 years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The Pattersons paid dearly for what they had done. They refinanced their house to cover the $95,000 settlement, taking on a second mortgage that would burden them for years. Richard was asked to resign from the church board after the truth came out. He had served on that board for 15 years, building a reputation as a trustworthy and upstanding member of the community. That reputation was gone now. Linda stopped attending social functions entirely. She could not face the whispers, the sideways glances, the quiet conversations that stopped whenever she walked into a room. The family that had prized image above all else had lost the only thing they ever truly valued. Kyle's wife Jennifer filed for divorce 6 weeks after our meeting. In the paperwork, she cited fundamental dishonesty and incompatibility of values. I heard through Aunt Caroline that Jennifer had known nothing about me before that dinner, that Kyle had never once mentioned having a sister, that she felt like she had married a stranger. Kyle moved back in with our parents at 32 years old, dependent on them once again, but this time in a house weighed down by debt and shame. The golden child had finally discovered that gold was just paint, and underneath it, he was hollow. Aunt Caroline did not simply tell the family the truth. She made sure everyone understood it completely. She sent a detailed email to every relative she could reach, explaining the inheritance theft, the documents I had signed, without knowing what they were, the 10 years of lies my mother had told to cover it all up. She attached copies of the evidence I had provided. She named names and gave dates and left no room for doubt. Then she called me. Her voice was heavy with guilt when she said she had believed Linda for a decade. She said she had let me suffer alone because she trusted her sister. She said she would never forgive herself for that failure, but she could make sure no one else in our family ever believed my mother's lies again. In the weeks that followed, relatives began reaching out to me. Cousins I had not spoken to since childhood sent messages asking how I was doing. An uncle who remembered me as a bright kid called to apologize for losing touch. Not everyone reached out. Some still sided with Linda, choosing to believe that I had somehow manipulated the situation or exaggerated my suffering. But enough people contacted me. Enough people finally knew the truth. After 10 years of being erased from my own family's story, I existed again. 90 days after the meeting, a check arrived at my Colorado address. The amount was $94,847. I held it in my hands for a long time, looking at my father's signature on the bottom. This was my inheritance 17 years late, extracted through legal pressure rather than love. I thought about what this money represented. It was the cost of my brother's education, his car, his first apartment. It was the reason I had slept in my car and eaten one meal a day and showered at a gym because I could not afford rent. It was the price of my family's betrayal. I endorsed the check and deposited it into a new account, one I had set up specifically for this purpose. The Megan Patterson Foundation would support young women who had been abandoned by their families during financial hardship. 3 months of emergency housing, career mentorship, a chance to rebuild. I did not need their money, I never had, but I could make sure it helped someone who did. A year and a half after the confrontation, a handwritten letter arrived at my house. The return address was my parents' home in Ohio, but the handwriting was not my mother's or my father's. It was Kyle's. I opened it slowly, unsure what to expect. The letter was short. Kyle wrote that he was not asking for forgiveness because he did not deserve it. He said his therapist had told him he needed to be honest with someone, and I was the only person he had never been honest with. He admitted that he had known something was wrong with the money. He said he had chosen not to ask questions because he did not want to know the answers. He had let himself believe he deserved everything he got, and I deserved nothing. He wrote that he was wrong. He said I was thrown out and became something while he was kept and became nothing. He was 33 years old, living with our parents divorced, working a job he hated. He did not know who he was without someone telling him. He was not asking me to fix him. He just needed me to know that he finally understood what our parents had done and what he had done by staying silent. I read the letter twice. I did not reply. But I did not throw it away either. I put it in a drawer, a reminder that the system that hurt me had also broken Kyle, just in a different way. He was not asking for a relationship. He was finally being honest, maybe for the first time in his life. That Thanksgiving, I hosted dinner at my Colorado house. Rachel came with her husband, filling my kitchen with laughter and the smell of her famous sweet potato casserole. 2 young women from the Foundation's first group of recipients brought homemade dishes and stories about their new jobs and apartments. Aunt Caroline flew in from Ohio, tearful and grateful to be included after so many years of believing lies. Mrs. Delgado sent a card that I read aloud to everyone at the table. She wrote that she always knew I would make it. Around that table, I looked at the faces of people who had chosen me. Not because of money, not because of blood, but because of who I was. Rachel, who believed in me when I had nothing. Aunt Caroline, who chose truth over family loyalty. The young women whose lives I was helping to rebuild, the same way I had rebuilt my own. This was my family now. Not the one I was born into, but the one I built. After everyone left, I stood on my balcony watching the sun set behind the mountains. My phone buzzed with a message from a young woman in the Foundation's program. She had gotten the job she interviewed for. She thanked me for believing in her. I smiled and typed back that I was proud of her and that now she needed to go believe in herself. Somewhere in Ohio, the Pattersons sat in their half-empty house, paying off a mortgage that would take years to clear. But I was not thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow, about the young women I would help, about the life I had built from nothing. For the first time in my 35 years, I was excited to see what came next. Megan's story teaches us something that many of us learn too late in life. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by who shows up when you have nothing to offer them. The people who love you only when you are successful are not your family. They are opportunists wearing familiar faces. They see you as an investment, not as a human being worthy of love simply because you exist. If someone in your life makes you feel invisible, makes you feel like a burden, makes you feel like you must earn the right to exist, that is not love. That is control. You deserve better. You deserve people who see your worth even when you cannot see it yourself. You deserve people who stay when things get hard, not people who disappear when you need them and reappear when you have something they want. Megan spent 10 years believing she was alone, but the truth was far worse than abandonment. Her family never loved her the way family should. They loved what she could provide. When she had nothing, she was worthless to them. When she had $200 million, suddenly she mattered. That is not love. That is transaction. If you have ever been the invisible one, the one told to be independent because no one wanted to invest in, this, your independence is not a flaw. It is your greatest strength. The quality that made your family dismiss you is the quality that will carry you forward when everyone else falls away. But here's the most important part. Megan did not end up alone. She found Rachel, who believed in her from the beginning. She found Aunt Caroline, who chose truth over loyalty. She found a community to build, and young women to mentor. Her real family was not the one she was born into, it was the one she created. Thank you for listening today. If Megan's journey touched your heart, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story. Leave a comment below. Have you ever discovered that your real family was not the one you were born into? We read every comment, and your stories matter to us. Until next time, remember you are worthy of love that does not come with conditions.